licensure review, as well as the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. They're getting a lot of inquiries into how do we convert our international licenses into a Utah professional license. And one of the most frequent inquiries they get is about teaching licenses. And so in order to, in some ways, combat some of the misinformation that's out there about how people can become licensed in Utah as teachers, we've put together this event in collaboration again with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, Center for Immigration Integration, as well as Department of Commerce, APPEL. And then we're teaming up with the Salt Lake Community College out at the Gail Miller campus with the Hispanic Serving Institution initiatives. And our audience really there is going to be those international applicants, mostly of Spanish-speaking background, who are interested in transferring their licenses over to the United States. And so that's an opportunity for them to get licensing information straight from the horse's mouth, as well as some information about dual immersion specifically. We've done kind of a little inquiry into the number of dual immersion licenses, and right now we have about 10%, 9 to 10% of our dual immersion teachers are either under licensed or incorrectly licensed. So we feel like this group of people would be probably a good fit for some of those dual immersion jobs. So we'll talk a little bit about dual immersion. We've got a guest panel there. And we included on the guest panel, we have Carl Bowman coming from USPE. He was our DLI and world language specialist, as well as some administrators from both the district and the charter DLI schools. And then we also have a guest who is a DLI teacher in the Alpine School District. In addition, we have Deputy Superintendent Patty Norman coming to do a welcoming address. And our hope is that we can get some representatives from schools and districts. And I know, again, it's been sort of a short timeline here. Some of these smaller departments work on a little tighter schedule than we do in USPE. So our hope is to get a few more districts and schools who'd be interested in just coming and maybe doing some recruitment for some of these folks. And again, that's Monday night. So again, short time frame here. Monday night, 4 to 7 p.m. Our goal would be to have the networking event going from, or the recruiting / networking going from about 6 to 7 p.m. And I believe I have sent an email invitation out to many of you, but if you do not have that, or if you'd like more information, just let me know. So I hope to see some of you there.
Thank you, Megan. I put the link to this meeting folder. Would you mind dropping that flyer in there?
Absolutely.
Probably also send out an email after this meeting to everybody with it, so they've got it.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much. And then let me go back. Skip. All right. And her flyer is definitely much prettier than my slides. So you'll want to look at that. It's got more information too. All right. So a little update on the foundations of reading. So I think most of you are aware that Lori Anderson is no longer employed at USPE. She's moved on to better things. And so if you need a voucher request, if you got a candidate who's ready to take the test, feel free to email me until we get her replacement hired, and we'll let you know when that happens. And I'll be processing those. And we have established a passing score of 240, which will go into effect on September 1st. In the board rule, it says that APPEL candidates whose PLPs were established after August 31st, 2022 are required to take the Foundations of Reading test. And if they're recommended for a license on or after September 1st, they will need to receive a score of 240 or higher to receive their license. So, any questions on that?
I have a quick question. And so if they don't meet that score, what is the alternative? I know Lilia talked about maybe letters training. Do you have that in place?
Almost. What we've been looking at so far, there is a Pearson offers a flex option that they basically kind of resubmit their writing portion because most people struggle with the writing part. If they're scoring within that kind of one standard error of the test. If they score really low, they'll either need to retake the test or we have a series of micro credentials that will be released hopefully soon that they'll be able to take. But we'll be sharing that information here in the next probably couple months. We got slowed down a little bit when we lost Lori, but we're still working on it and hopefully get that out to you soon. Any other questions on that?
This is Shonda. I have a question.
Mhm.
I'm just double checking myself. So if someone whose PLP was established before August 31st, 2022, but is going to be recommended after September 1st, 2024, they like the PLP date trumps the passing score, right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, I just wanted to double check I was interpreting that correctly. Thank you.
Yes. And that's why we changed our recommendation letter to ask for when the date the PLP was established. It's not information that we have readily available. That's what you guys have. So as long as that date says that it was established before August 31st, 2022, then we do not require a Foundations of Reading score. Any other questions? I don't see any in the chat. So. Okay, I will move on. Thank you. Oh, so this is a slide that we used last time, but this is just a friendly reminder of what HB 208 is. There is more to it than just the limit on the PPA. So if you're interested in that part of it, you're welcome to refer back to what we shared last month. There's an implementation guide here. And but we are going to touch a little bit on the PPA part because that's where we're getting all these questions. So the state, the code, the rule, the bill goes into effect on May 1st, which will be before when the board has a final decision on how they want to handle it. So in order to be compliance with the state code, before the board makes a decision, we have proposed the following. Starting May 1st, anybody who can be recommended for a professional license if they have a PPA with any score or they complete their micro-credential stack, which we've identified as HQ1 Part 1, HQI Part 2, and diverse learners. That will give them options to be recommended without a PPA. And meet with their full board on May 2nd, so we'll have a better idea of what they're thinking about as far as aligning code or board rule with code. And that, unfortunately, that'll have a 45-day comment period, so it won't go into effect on May 2nd. It will go into effect in mid-June. So right now, in their committee that met a couple weeks ago, this is how they've modified the rule. It just says that the candidates must demonstrate all pedagogical competencies as established by the superintendent. And I think most of you are aware, as we'll talk a little bit later, is, we have general teaching pedagogies, we have content pedagogies, and we have clinical pedagogies, and then the PPA. So basically it just removes that PPA component, and they still have to demonstrate all the competencies, but the PPA is not in addition to that. So that is what's being proposed. And so if the board approves that in May, starting in mid-June, they would just need to demonstrate that they've met the competencies. Sorry, let me go back. I do see a couple comments in the chat. Megan says that she's placed the flyer in the folder, and then we'll also send it out via email after this meeting. Are there any questions on the PPA requirement?
Okay, so Lisa, if I'm reading that correctly, they still take the PPAT, but they get any score, or they take the micro credentials still.
Yes, if they're going to be
Okay.
recommended for a license between now, well, May 1st, because right now the PPA is required with a cut score. So in the next week or so, if they're going to be recommended in the next week, we're going to be looking for a PPA score of 36 or whatever the TPA ones are. If they're recommended starting May 1st, between May and mid-June, then they'll need a PPA with any score or the micro-credential stacks.
Okay,
And then
And then-
if the board approves what they approved in committee, then we wouldn't be looking for a PPA score starting mid-June.
so
Or-
then would we be looking for anything there?
No, they would just need their recommendation, pass their ethics and their background, and they would, if their PLP was established after, well, for elementary and early childhood, if their PLP was established after August 31st, 2022, then they would need the Foundations of Reading score.
Okay, thank you for that clarification.
Oh, and they will also need a bachelor's degree posted in Cactus. So if they don't have that, we would need their transcripts that shows their bachelor's degree.
Okay, just clarification, possibly mid-June, no more PPA.
Yes, if the board approves what they approved in the committee last week, but you guys know our board, it's really difficult to predict what they're going to do. So this is still an if because it hasn't been approved yet.
And then when that happens, we will get a notification of what they decided,
Yes, we
like
will
an
send that.
email or something. Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Sure.
We are planning to send out a new licensing newsletter as soon as they make that decision with whatever that decision is. So we're hopeful that that'll go out next Friday, the new licensing letter or newsletter.
Kelly reminded me, what about CTE folks without bachelor's? That is correct. If they're being recommended for a CTE license area, they do not need to have a bachelor's degree. Let's forget about that. Any other questions on that? Well, that one's pretty easy. All right, moving on. So this is also something that we shared in our last month, is the draft implementation timeline. We received some great feedback on that. If you didn't get a chance to provide feedback, feel free to do that. I just reposted it here because we're going to be talking a little bit more about this. In fact, I'll just share it really fast. The part that we're going to be talking about today is we've been creating these resources that we plan to release by June 1st. This crosswalk of new competencies to old competencies, we're going to share a little bit about that. And then how to submit evidence your program will align to the new competencies is what we're going to seek feedback on today. So that, and then just for clarification, that feedback is going to be following this timeline. So from June 2024 to June 2025, programs will need to submit their documents by June 1st, 2025, how they're going to align to the new competencies. If your staff does not work during the summer, it will probably need to be submitted before, because that'll be the first opportunity we have to provide feedback. And if there needs to be revisions, those will be done between June and August 1st, because all final approvals will need to be done by August 1st. And then just for clarity, programs will need to notify candidates of potential program changes or discontinued programs prior to September 1st, because the expectation is that any candidate who enrolls in your program starting September 1st of 2025 are expected to meet the new competencies. So they'll need to be notified of that. If anybody enrolls on, say, August 31st, 2025, they can still use the current competencies. And if for some reason a program doesn't get their program aligned to the new competencies, they will not be able to enroll candidates in their program after August 31st, 2025.
Lisa, just for clarification on that,
Mhm.
if they're still working on the new competencies, they can still continue programming with the candidates that are in the old program that were
Yes.
registered before that timeline. They just can't add anyone new at that time.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna go back. I did a meeting yesterday, and I don't know if you guys know who Darren Nelson is. He's the Assistant Superintendent of Student Learning here at USB. Really great guy, really smart, very nice. He comes from a counseling background, so you can kind of tell. But he made a comment, and it didn't have anything to do with this new competency stuff, but it really hit me probably because there's been a lot of change in my life recently, and I'm going, why do I have to do this? And so I wanted to share it with you. It says, to grow and improve, change is necessary. And I thought that was pretty profound, that if we're going to grow and improve, we do have to change. So with that in mind, we'll talk about a little bit about what is competency. And this is the definition that we have in our board rule 303. It says competency means evidence of successful application of knowledge and skills shown through demonstration in a higher education or pre-K through 12 classroom setting. And I thought this definition was really appropriate as we look at what these competencies are and how we will know that candidates are competent, because it kind of helps to define a couple of things. That competency is basically evidence of application of knowledge and skills that are shown through demonstration in, and it kind of defines where they're going to demonstrate in either a higher ed or pre-K through 12 classroom setting. So as we keep that in mind and we look at some of our competencies, we'll notice that the new competencies have been defined as one of these three areas. So competencies define the knowledge and skills needed for professional licensure and how and where the competency needs to be demonstrated. So every new competency is defined as either a basic concept knowledge, which is defining the knowledge that's needed, an application, which is a skill, and a demonstration, which is a skill. And some people ask, what's the difference between application and demonstration? And it's really the level or the situation in which the candidate is being asked to demonstrate. So basic concept knowledge, teacher candidates demonstrate knowledge through assignments or assessments. Application is teacher candidates apply competency in a university setting with other adults or in a lesson plan. And demonstration is teacher candidates demonstrate competency in a classroom setting with children. And so the big difference between the application and the demonstration is application is where they're demonstrating that competency in, say, a practice setting with other adults, or they're planning how they're going to demonstrate that skill. I think lesson writing is definitely a skill that can be demonstrated, but it may not necessarily be done with real students in real situations. But the demonstration skills are done in a classroom setting with children, so that would be real students in real situations. And as we apply that to, here's kind of a snapshot of the general teaching competencies. You notice the competency is defined here on the left, and then it'll tell you what level of demonstration that is being looked for. So for this one here, they're being asked to demonstrate that in a classroom setting with students, with real students in real situations. Design learning that builds on learners' background knowledge and supports students' needs. This one would be more, say, in a practice setting. They could do it as part of a university course, or they could write a lesson plan that shows how they might design learning that builds on the learner's background knowledge and student needs, but doesn't necessarily have to be done with real students in real classrooms. And then this is an example of the elementary content, particularly for math. It also has the same demonstration and application settings. So it gives us an idea of what level of demonstration is expected of the candidate for that competency. So some of the key ideas that we've been discussing here that we wanted to share with you, basic concept knowledge and application competencies. So these competencies can be demonstrated by taking a course that aligns to the competency or by submitting evidence such as a lesson plan or a praxis test. These competencies do not need to be demonstrated in a classroom with children. Evidence of demonstrated competency could include examples of applying the competency in hypothetical situations, case studies, or with hypothetical students. Programs may require candidates to demonstrate these competencies in a classroom with children, but USB does not require this level of demonstration of these competencies. And then for the demonstration competencies, these competencies must be demonstrated in a classroom setting with children. So these competencies cannot be demonstrated by taking a course. And evidence of demonstrated competency could include things like completing the USB microcredentials, pedagogical performance assessments, capstone or portfolio projects that may include independent evaluation of competency. Oh, and that was the last key idea. So before we get into comparing new and old competencies, are there any questions or comments on that so far?
Lisa, if I could ask one.
Sure.
So my question is we did that crosswalk with the SUU courses for the language arts, the math, PE, art, those things. Do those meet these competencies, or will we need to get with SUU and redo those?
You may need to get with SUU again. We're definitely going to be asking for the evidence that they align to the new competencies. So whether you have to change anything or not, then we'll still need the evidence that they align to the new competencies. We'll have to submit that form that we're going to be sharing with you shortly.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Lisa, can I ask one more follow-up on this? So, for example, if someone took a course in early literacy and instruction at WGU, but didn't do the student teaching through WGU because they got a degree in educational studies, they could meet the competencies for the basic concept knowledge and maybe some of the application ones for that course requirement, but not the demonstration competencies. Those would all have to be done through the APPEL program.
Yeah, that would be a safe assumption.
Okay.
Great questions. Any other questions? I see something in the chat. So if a pedagogy course is approved by USB APPEL, it will meet connected basic knowledge and application competencies. Yes, that would be the idea.
Maria has her hand, and then I do too.
Yes.
Well, Lisa, so this demonstration competency, if part of a course was that a teacher was to videotape her or himself demonstrating, and then turn that in to be assessed by the instructor, could that demonstration competency be met in that way? Or you're saying that's something a principal should be observing and documenting? I'm not clear on all that.
That's a great question. And we have had this discussion a lot in our office. Theoretically, it could meet the competency. Our concern is that, is it possible for the candidate to say not pass that particular assignment, but still pass the course? And then we wouldn't know whether the person was competent in those competencies. So that's a little bit different way of looking at it, because, you know, we do expect them to meet that level of competency, and we're looking specifically for, say, that assignment, right? That they need to pass that particular assignment. So if they can't pass the course without passing that assignment, then that might work. But, and that was kind of why we're thinking, well, it's getting into the weeds a little bit, and maybe it's safer to just say, you know, they can't take a course. But if, you know, this is why this is still in draft form, if you've got a really good way to present that might work, we're definitely willing to look at that.
Yeah, I don't even know that it's feasible completely, you know, that can get kind of challenging for an instructor. But then would those evidence of demonstration move to the district or to the building mentor or principal then, and they would record those competencies for demonstration? And then I just worry about application at the course level. For sure.
Yeah. And that's where I think our programs are going to need to kind of sit down as they're designing these demonstration competencies and deciding how the candidates are going to demonstrate those. There will likely need to be some kind of an evaluation of that competency. So who's going to evaluate it? How are they going to evaluate it? those are the kinds of questions we're going to be looking for as we're moving towards adopting these into our programs.
Okay, Lisa, I noticed the PPA in there. Is that something that we could have? I know we have our own, so we could change kind of how we're doing it and have that part of, you know, the requirement. I guess it wouldn't be a PPA. I mean, is that going against the rule? And what do you think about that? How is that as part of this?
If the board adopts the the 301 as they might, you know, as has been proposed, you would be using it as a way to demonstrate competency. So it could be used in that sense.
But probably not called a PPA.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And I know that's what our universities are looking at, because before we established the PPA requirement, they had what they called the professional, was it performance assessments evaluation of student teachers. And it was basically it's a portfolio slash evaluation of candidates. And so they're kind of going back to that, where they're going to tweak it so it aligns to new competencies, but they're going to call it their capstone, so that it's a combination of submitting some evidence and their cooperating teachers going in and observing candidates in the classroom.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions on that? Oh, can you explain, define, includes independent evaluation of competency? So it basically would not, the candidate can't say, I'm competent. Somebody would need to go in and either observe them or evaluate the evidence that's been submitted. There'll need to be some kind of like a checklist or a rubric or something that they're using to evaluate. Ideally, that person would have some kind of training on how to do that, but we're leaving that up to you on who that is and how they're going to do that. Does that help, Shonda?
Yeah, I guess I just wanted to make sure that independent evaluation could be within the APPEL program or university program, and did not mean outside of that.
Yes. It just means not the candidate evaluating themselves.
So it definitely has to be more than self-reporting.
Yes.
Can I just get an overall clarification? So things that we have right now that you have asked to be in our plans, and the clinical experience competencies and the pedagogy and the fieldwork observations, all of those things are really going away. And we just meet this one form. There's the one form that we need to have our program cover.
Yeah, it could be that simple. So this kind of leads us into our next part, is comparing new and old competencies. In the past, we've had kind of these 4 areas that candidates had to demonstrate competency in, which is the general teacher preparation, the content, knowledge, and pedagogy, clinical experiences, and then the pedagogical performance assessment. Now, assuming that the board approves what they proposed by mid-June, we could just have these 2 areas. So we do have general teacher preparation competencies, and we do have content competencies. And those content competencies are defined by the area of licensure that they're seeking. So we have approved elementary and early childhood competencies that we're going to be reviewing this next year. For secondary, they are doing the new endorsement forms. So that'll also go into effect in 2025. And then for special ed and preschool special ed, they haven't had any changes, but they do have content specific competencies that they'll continue to use. And then, so it's just important to remember that there are really 2 sets of competencies, the general teacher preparation and the content competencies, but they both include evaluation of knowledge and skills. And then as we've been comparing some of the old competencies and the new competencies, we found that they've kind of fall into different categories. So some of the new competencies are directly related to the old competencies. So there's really no change between the two. So whatever you were doing with the old competencies, you can continue to doing with the new competency. And then some of the new competencies are very similar to the old competencies, but may need some adjustment of what's being demonstrated or how it's demonstrated. And then the new competencies, there are some new competencies that are completely new and do not have any relation to an old competency. So that might need to be added to whatever you've got from previously. So just kind of an example of that. This is an example of a competency that's directly related to the old competency. So this one was a previous clinical competency where candidates are expected to participate in at least one IEP meeting or parental consultation regarding a student in the program. And then the new competency says they need to participate in meetings with students, parents, guardians, like an IEP 504, to help assess, and plan needed student support. Now, you might be able to argue that before they didn't have to talk about student support, but maybe we'll assume that they are. But it's also a demonstrated student competency, so they were expected to meet that in the classroom of students. So we're assuming that if they did the previous competency, they have met the new competency. And then this is an example of a competency that's similar to an old competency, but may needs to be tweaked a little bit. So previous competency is providing positive constructive feedback to guide students' learning and behavior. And then the new demonstration competency is provide formative and timely feedback to guide students in self-assessment of learning. Now, the previous competency was a competency that was met through taking a course. And then the new competency is a demonstration competency, so it would need to be demonstrated in a classroom with students. And then there's also this part about self-assessment of learning. So we are still providing formative and timely feedback, but it's to guide students in self-assessment of learning, which is a little more specific than just to guide students learning. So that's kind of where it might need a little bit of tweaking. And then this one here is a competency that doesn't have a direct correlation to an old competency. It's provide opportunities for students to track, reflect on, and set goals for their learning. This one doesn't really have a previous competency that it aligns to, but it is an application competency. So we would expect this competency to be either demonstrated through taking a course or through a lesson plan. So they might provide a plan of how they're going to encourage students to track, reflect, and set goals for their learning, but they don't need to necessarily demonstrate it with students in a classroom. Any questions?
Sorry, I just was going to ask, could they demonstrate it? So if they're already doing that, we could take what they've already done and use that as the demonstration, as long as it's either in a classroom or done without students. Either way would work.
Yes, that would work.
Okay.
Sorry, I just saw we had another chat. Wait, endorsement forms are changing again? No, they, the drop dead deadline for the new endorsement form. So, you know, people are still kind of in that transition phase of old forms and the new forms, but starting in 2025, everybody will have to use the new forms. So that's what I meant, is that by 2025, everybody will be on the competency and the new competency endorsement forms. Hopefully that helps ease some anxiety, Shonda. Okay, and then, so just to recap, oh, go ahead.
I don't know if it's clarification or suggestion. I mean, asking for suggestions, but when we fit in this little zone where we have people who started in a program, and so their requirements were a little different than the person that starts in the next year. And so now we're in this weird zone again, because obviously we have some who just started this year. We're going to set up people to start this coming year, but these are all going to be coming into effect in 2025, right? We're going to build this program. Do you have any suggestions on, well, maybe I should say, so are we going to set anyone I start in APPEL between now and whatever, next 2025, they're going to be set up on these old requirements, right?
Yes.
Or do they transfer over to the new program? Like, when do we get to say they get to follow the new rules, or we get to hold them to the old rules? Because it could be our benefit either way. So tell me how I take advantage of all this.
We do have some programs, like some of our university programs are talking like they're going to hurry and go through this approval process over the summer so that they can start everybody on the new system this fall. Now that is acceptable. The concern was that it might take some time for programs to, change their courses and get all the resources available, get the supporting documentation to help support these candidates on the new process. So that's why we're giving it a year. But by 2025, everybody would need to be on the new process. If you want to start earlier, that's fine if your program's ready to do that. The key is that whatever candidates start on is what they should be ending on. So unless they choose to change. So if you've got candidates that started on the old process, they
Yeah.
are under an obligation to continue on that, unless they decide they want to make changes on their own.
So there is a not, that's what I guess probably should have asked. I was gonna ask if we start them on a outline that we currently have, and then we say, actually, this is all changed, and we do have the ability to make some adjustments and line them out on the, I mean, if they're only 1 year into it and they're still taking some content classes and that, it probably isn't that big a deal to say, let's put you on this new format. It's the same as going forward. This is the new change. We can, do we have the liberty to do that? Update their plan and move it to new requirements versus old requirements?
I would say yes, as long as the candidate's on board. We don't want a candidate to be delayed because of the change. But if it's something that's going to help them get through the program faster, then it might be worth changing. If it's going to help them save time and money, then I think it would be worth changing. Sometimes we get complaints from candidates that say, my, POP is constantly changing and I don't know what's expected of me. We're trying to avoid that, so that we have happy candidates.
Can I ask a quick question?
Mhm.
So if I have a candidate who starts on the old competencies this fall, that would be fall 2024, does that mean they have until 2027 to finish those old competencies?
We haven't established a date on when they have to finish from the state perspective. Now, I know there's programs that say they have to finish by the time their AEL expires or whatever, and that would be a program decision. And you could set a deadline of when you want your candidates to finish.
So right now, it's really just based on when their PLP was established.
Yes.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good questions. Oh, I see another comment. Oh, and help your program to maintain capacity. Yeah, that's definitely a consideration. Okay, so if you, just a little disclaimer, because we've had a lot of excitement about the new competencies. If you're attempting to align your program to the new competencies prior to June 1st of this year, we just ask that you use caution because we're still trying to figure things out. And we'd hate for you to start making resources and things that don't necessarily align to what we share. So we do plan to release these resources by June 1st. So after June 1st, you should have complete autonomy to keep going. If you want to start sooner, that's fine. Just make sure you're reaching out to us and then be prepared to make adjustments after those resources are published. If completing micro-credentials that will meet requirements for the old and new competencies, USPE does intend between June and December of this year to create new competencies. So we will maintain the old micro-credentials that align to the old competencies, but we'll also create new micro-credentials that align to the new competencies. And we do intend on having micro-credentials that address all the competencies, not just the demonstration or the application ones. So those will be available starting in January. And so if you've got candidates that are starting on the new process and you say you want them to do micro-credentials, they'll just need to know that they can't do a micro-credential until we have those available in January. It's a good question. Okay, so new competency implementation timeline. I think this is just rehashing what we talked about earlier. So if you have any questions on that, let us know. Now, here's the competency approval template. This is kind of the big item. Now, just a little disclaimer, we use something similar to this with our university programs aligning to secondary content areas. So it's worked in one situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean it'll work in all situations. So we'd love your feedback on this. And I realize some people have trouble following in spreadsheets. Some people love spreadsheets, some people hate them. So just to kind of give you an idea. So we've got your program name, the director, some point of secondary contact. This tab, the first tab is for the general competencies. The second tab is for all elementary content except for literacy. And then the third tab is just for elementary literacy. And then the idea is that we've divided these up between basic concept knowledge, application, and demonstration. And the competencies are on the left-hand side. And then in these boxes, so you could, it's kind of an idea of what we're looking for, but if you have a better way of doing it, that's fine. So method of demonstrating competencies. So if your candidates are going to take a course that helps them understand equal opportunity as outlined in R277-328, then you would list the name of that course. You would provide a course description or a learning outcome. We'll look at that and say, oh, yep. So this is an example here. This course will help students understand different federal and state laws that impact teaching. Students will understand state laws that apply to educators. This includes IDEA, FERPA, R277-328. And then this is the evidence that you will use to determine whether the candidate has met that competency. So in this case, did they successfully pass the course? So you would collect a transcript of them passing this particular course. So similar to some of the application ones, if they're taking a course, this one is the example we use for classroom management. I can't remember, was it this one? Which competency were we doing? Is it real world?
It was further down.
Further down. Greg was the one that was working on this, so he might need to help answer some questions. Anyway, so the example is rather than, so in this class, they're going to do a lesson plan. They write a classroom management plan that focuses on involving students and establishing clear guidelines for behavior. And then they're going to do verify that they completed that through a transcript. And then for the demonstration, we have some examples of so this is for this first competency here. Candidates will submit meeting notes and a written reflection of a meeting they had with the student's parents or guardians where the candidate discussed the student's needs with a parent or guardian. The meeting notes and reflection will be artifact 1 of the candidate's capstone project. And then the evidence that the program is going to maintain is some kind of a capstone evaluation rubric. So you would share your rubric or your template that you're going to use to evaluate that capstone project. And then that is what can be maintained in the candidate's file. You don't necessarily need to keep copies of all their portfolio evidences that they submit, just whatever that evaluation rubric is that shows that it was evaluated and they passed. Any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes.
Looking at this draft here. So I'm just saying, if I was to sit down, and I understand this is a draft, but I'm to sit down with an individual we've hired for elementary, just to clarify.
Mhm.
I would need to review the general competency tab, because I'm assuming that applies to everybody in every position. This is just general competency to be a teacher. And then I'm going to say, okay, new elementary teacher. Now let's look at the second tab, because these are specific to elementary competency. And we're going to have 63 lines we're going to review here of competencies you need to demonstrate. And then let's go to tab 3, and we have elementary literacy competencies. This is another area you're going to demonstrate. And I got 98 lines we're going to review here. I'm just like, am I the only one that's like, holy cow, I just have 200 things I gotta, I mean, I understand not every line is filled out, but I'm just saying, like, wowzers, that just seems like, maybe not, maybe it's felt like that all along, but that just looks really daunting for a new person. So
Yes.
have you heard
I
this before, or am
understand.
I just out in left field?
Yes, I understand. And that's actually our next project here is realizing that there are a lot of competencies in elementary content and literacy. But there are competencies that overlap. And so we're going to identify those that, for example, if you meet this Plans for implement differentiated instruction by selecting and using appropriate assessments, including the amount of teacher regulation of feedback. So if they're doing this for literacy, they've met a general teaching competency. I believe there is a differentiated instruction one in here somewhere. Anyway, so we're going to also provide some guidance on how many of these competencies overlap. And so they're not evaluating 93 competencies. They may be evaluating like 40 or 50. So that's our hope. And that's also something we'll have available hopefully by June 1st.
And just to clarify, this is something that the programs will submit to us. It is just to show what evidence they will submit or have with their programs. This is not something that you need to do with each candidate, if that helps. This is just for us to understand where you're going to ensure that candidates will meet these competencies.
But I'm just saying, if I'm sitting down with a candidate and I want them to understand, these are the things that you're going to do because it's going to demonstrate competency in all of these lines. I still think it's a lot to, I mean, they need to understand why we're asking. I mean, I don't know, personally, I want them to know why I asked them to do what they're doing, and this is what it qualifies and counts for. And so I just think it is a little daunting. I'm glad to hear there might be some clarification, because I think that does help. I'm just saying, it looks a lot. I'm not going to share all of this with a candidate because I think I'll have them leaving my office crying. A lot of times they do, and they realize, oh my gosh, this is way more than I thought, which is fine. That's what they sign up for. But
I think we
It
would
just-
have to show them
me.
this to be truly transparent. So that they don't go, this is more hoops to jump through.
Sometimes it is helpful to have a parallel analogy that makes sense. And getting a driver's license might make sense. To pass the test to get your driver's license, it's like, take this, you have to know the content knowledge and you've got to be able to drive. But one specific competency is turning on your blinker to make a right-hand turn, turning on your blinker to merge. Like, those are different competencies. And so they're tiny little skills, not necessarily like drive a car. So teach a class is a big thing, but it's tiny things like, okay, you've got to be able to talk to parents. You got to be able to talk to students. You got to be able to, like, all these little tiny things. And so that sometimes is helpful to be like, oh, that's something they understand, and to find that relationship to be able to see this is a tiny skill that is part of the entire job.
And I think to go along with that, we are planning on releasing a new PLP template, and perhaps we could release a guiding document or provide some clarity on, we're thinking, well, and the template is something that you can use as a tool, or you could do something totally different. You're not required to use it. But I do see, if we say, well, you need to demonstrate this competency, it would help to know where the competency comes from and why it's important. And so we could share some additional information that could be useful along with that PLP template.
And I appreciate that. I'm glad. I was hoping you were going to say there's some guiding templates coming together, because I do appreciate that. I would rather have it somewhere to start, and then I can see where I need to tweak it to help with my own explanations. So thank you, because I thought I got to start putting this on my to-do list on figuring out how to help. And I appreciate that analogy, Malia. I do think that's right. When you look at some of this stuff, anyway, thank you. I'm going to take a breath and say we have a little bit of time. So this isn't something that has to be done right now. Thank you.
No. Yeah, thank you. We appreciate that. We appreciate that feedback too. This is a process that we're all going through together, and we'd like it to be as smooth as possible. Okay, so.
Can I ask one more question?
Yes.
So as I've started to take a look at the crosswalk between what our program does and what the new companies are, the only biggest question I have is, are we going to get like a list of this course from the university will meet these competencies? Because right now, most of the competencies really do seem similar, but I'm just worried about the courses meeting, because I rely heavily on those. Sorry, I can't talk today. I rely heavily on those to meet some of those competencies.
Yes. Also in the timeline that we shared, our plan between now and hopefully January is to meet with our university partners. The big ones are SUU and Salt Lake Community College, and they're going to be also revising their courses to meet these competencies. So when they have that done, we can share that with you. And if you want to continue to use those as part of your program, you're welcome to put that in your feedback form. I know all of our universities are that, like University of Utah offers courses in the summer, so they will have those that'll align. And then I think UVU, some people are using UVU courses. So they're all going through this process at the same time, and they'll have that available if you would like to use those. We also have Apple programs that design their own courses, and so that is also the process that we'll need to use if they're going to change their courses to align to these competencies. We'll still need to go through that MIDAS approval process, but this will be kind of that first step in understanding what that course is going to look like. And then we'll also have you submit them through MIDAS to get approval. Okay, I think I answered Shonda's question, but if I didn't, feel free to speak up, Shonda. I think we're good.
Now I'm wondering, we've got all these new elementary competencies that are coming in now, like there's not, are there going to be methods classes for all of those now that haven't been offered before? Or I mean, I maybe that's part of the coming from the universities and stuff, but you know, how much is letters training going to meet the elementary literacy competencies? How much? It's a little overwhelming right now. Even with things that are solidly prepared and have had good track record, it's a lot. And I look at those elementary teachers especially, and I worry about that.
Yeah, we are worried about that too, and it's something we have been working on. And we hope to have some information to share with you by June 1st. So that's the deadline we're giving ourselves. So hopefully we'll have some more and stuff that'll make it a little less overwhelming, because it is a lot. And we realize that it may not always be, but anyway, so we're working on that. Do you see all of this calming down at some point? That's a good question. We've been specifically asked to put our competencies on a 5-year cycle, similar to standards. So we do not anticipate that these will change for the next 5 years. We're also talking about, even after that 5 years, we'll probably do a little bit of put some feelers out to ask if the field feels like there needs to be changes. And if there doesn't need to be changes, we won't change them. So that's kind of the process that we're looking at long-term, to kind of help things settle down. Hopefully that helps answer that question. We'll put the link to the PowerPoint in the chat. In fact, let me put the link to this Google form, and you guys can provide some feedback on there. We're happy to consider any and all feedback, even if it's like, oh, this is so overwhelming.
Lisa, could I report in on, I checked in at last meeting, they asked about a possible elementary PE/health/fine arts course for methods. And talking to USB, nobody's willing to give up their hours to have a combined course. For example, the endorsement for PE currently is like 120 hours, and they feel all of that's precious and they can't give any of that up. And so to go from that plus add fine arts plus add health into 45 hours. And I just want you to know I'm talking to people about it, but there's, you know, everybody loves their stuff and feels like it's essential for every teacher to have in every case. And just want you to know that's the politics of the day. So
yes, and
Maria, I've been meeting with all of those specialists. We met a couple weeks ago before I was out on leave.
Yeah.
And so we are coming up, we've just finalized a proposal. You should be getting an email from
Okay, good.
Jody. We're looking at, instead of having a 1 3-credit course, if could be 3 1-credit courses.
Okay.
And everybody's on board. They were in the realm of the new competencies are the only thing that count. And I was like, nope, we're still in this old land where we have lots of people who are trying to get through the old requirements. So there was some clarification there and some coordination and calibration. And so we've got a plan coming forward. So look forward to that.
Thank you for facilitating that, because
Yeah.
yeah. And I'm happy to be involved once you guys figure that all out.
Yeah, you bet.
Whoops, it started all the way back from the beginning again. And then as soon as you've submitted your feedback, we are done for the day. So we'll stick around with questions that you may have. And I will probably stop the recording. Thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate it. And then as soon as you've submitted your feedback, we are done for the day. So we'll stick around with questions that you may have. And I will probably stop the recording. Thanks everybody for coming. We really appreciate it.